Advent's a time of preparation on two different ways. Firstly, it's a preparation for the coming of the light into the world, for Christmas, for the birth of Jesus, for God taking on human flesh and entering human history. And so it's a spiritual preparation for that. It's also, in some ways, a time to think of the last thing, a time for a spiritual MOT, to say, where am I with God in my journey?
Unapologetic from Premier Unbelievable.
I am delighted to be joined today by Arun Arora, the Bishop of Kirkstall in the Diocese of Leeds and the Honorary Canon of Ripon Cathedral. Arun has written the excellent book, Stick with Love, which is the Archbishop of York's Advent book for this year. Arun, thank you so much for joining us today.
Ruth, it's great to be with you.
Arun, what I love to do is to go back right to the beginning of people's lives. I don't know whether you would be happy to just share a little bit about your own experience of God growing up when you were younger.
Happily. So I don't come from a Christian family. My mother is Hindu. My dad was Sikh. He died when I was fairly young, when I was about 8. And so Christianity was something that you kind of imbibed from school, perhaps, or from assemblies, but certainly nothing in the house, nothing in the home about that. And so my journey to faith, really, there were a few pivotal moments, but one of which, one that I write about in the book, happened when I was a teenager, about 13 years old. And growing up in Birmingham, that wonderful divine city of Birmingham, it was only natural that I would be an Aston Villa fan. Support my local football team. But one of the things about growing up around football grounds in the late 70s, early 80s, is football grounds were the recruiting grounds back then for the far right, for the British National Party, the National Front. And so my mom, probably quite wisely, thought that football grounds weren't the best places for a chubby 13-year-old Asian boy to be if she didn't want to end up picking me up from accident and emergency. So I'd never been to Villa Park. I'd always wanted to go, never had been. And then one day, walking home from school, I saw a poster outside my local church saying that some guy called Billy Graham would be talking at Villa Park, and they would be taking coaches to Villa Park, and those coaches would be free. And Ruth, I spotted my opportunity to go and worship at Villa Park.
To go to the hallowed ground.
To go to that place. And I didn't know who or what Billy Graham was. But I badgered my mum and said, come on, we got to go. And in the end, she said, all right. And we went to Villa Park. And that night when I got there, I heard Billy Graham talk about Jesus, about new life in Jesus, about sin, about forgiveness, about the triumph of the cross, about the life, birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And at the end of that, he invited people, if they wanted to make a commitment, to come and be prayed for. And I stood up, I looked at my mum, and I said, can I go? And she said, it's up to you. You do what you feel you must do. And so Ruth, I went and I took a step onto that hallowed turf of Villa Park. I took a step onto that church and I invited Jesus into my life. And I still remember getting home that night, just how buzzing I was, just full of the Spirit, speaking to God as if he was in the chair right next to me, and just being full. And it was, without doubt, the best decision I have ever made. But the funny thing, Ruth, was that after that night, I didn't go to church for 3 years. And the reason wasn't, it wasn't that I didn't want to. It was that I didn't know how to. I didn't know anyone who's Christian. I didn't know what you had to do when you went to church. I wouldn't know when to stand up, when to sit down. And I was a self-conscious teenage boy, I wasn't going to go in a place that I didn't know. So it wasn't for 3 years until a friend of mine got released from a young offenders institution, those days known as Borstal. And he was keen to do something on Friday nights that was different to what he was doing before, that had led him into trouble. And his sisters went to a local Baptist church, and they ran a youth group. And he said, "What are you doing on Friday night?" I said, "Nothing." And he said, "Come on, let's go." And so we went, and it was a classic 1980s youth club, empty hall, really bad dartboard and dodgy pool table, kicking a ball around, bad badminton court type thing. So I've been going there a few weeks, and the guy who ran it, who was just a normal member of his local church who volunteered, helping out kids and helping out doing something for young teens, he said, "What are you doing on Sunday?" And I said, "Nothing." He says, "Why not come out?" And there began my real journey of faith, where I discovered church, discovered Christian community, learned about the Bible, and took the decision, I think it was a couple of years later then, to be baptized. And I was baptized there, and there that began the second leg of my journey, as it were. The first leg began at Villa Park. The second leg took part in Birmingham at Selly Park Baptist Church.
Wow. And I mean, I feel like you're presumably quite biased because you are the result of amazing stadium evangelism. But lots of people today would perhaps say that stadium evangelism has maybe had its place. What would you say to that? Do you think there is still a place for stadium evangelism today?
I think there's still a place for event evangelism. I think most people, and I think the research shows most people come to faith just through knowing someone else who is a Christian, through conversation, through those individual interactions. But I think event evangelism, and you can talk about it in stadiums, you can talk about it as something like an alpha course, coming here to an alpha talk and inviting someone along to that. Things like, I remember when I worked in Birmingham, J. John ran Just 10, those wonderful evangelistic series of events. And I think it's a mixed ecology. One of the things about Just 10, say, was that when we helped to run that back in Birmingham, one of the things they were really clear on was you had to prepare local churches as partners first, so that if somebody came to faith, if somebody responded to what they heard, there was immediate follow-up. There was someone there. And that was very different to what happened to me at Billy Graham.
Yeah.
You see, and so there's a mix in all of that. And I think one of the things about event follow-up, as it were, as you also see in Alpha, is that it strengthens the faith of those Christians who are already there, seeking to explain their faith, seeking to accompany and disciple someone new. That if you do that, you grow in your own faith as you do it. So it's not simply about proclaiming the word and inviting through evangelism new people to come into relationship with Jesus. It's also about, in the doing of that, people themselves grow that evangelism muscle. They grow that discipleship practice, where they learn to talk about their faith confidently, but also reasonably, in a way that invites engagement and proclaims the word of the Lord.
I think that's really helpful. Now, did you have any idea when you were kicking about in that massive hall with the dodgy toys? Did you have any idea when you came to faith there that you would end up as a bishop in the Church of England?
Well, no, I didn't even think I'd end up in the Church of England, to be honest. I didn't really know much about denominations. You come to faith, you come to faith. I remember at school, not long afterwards, being in what was then known as General Studies. I think the forerunner to PHSE and things like that. One of the teachers asking if people, had a faith, and I put my hand up. And he said, "And what faith are you?" And I says, "I'm a Christian." And he says, "What denomination are you?" And I didn't know the answer, because I was just going to church. I didn't know there was. So, but I loved the Baptist church where I came to faith, where I was discipled, where I discovered what it is to be part of the Christian family and community. But sadly, I think my experience of Baptist church is very much my own experience, was that when they work well, they're brilliant, and we had such a wide range of ages, racial backgrounds, of different socio-economic backgrounds. It was brilliant. And when they work well, they're wonderful examples of family. But my then own experience of a church split was really difficult. I found myself in leadership for a while as a deacon of that church, but I became one of the casualties when the devil gets in. And, a church, a really strong church, about 150, 160 people, ended up, I think, with a church of 30 people, with marriages and many years coming to an end, with really family relationships shattered. And I left that church in my early 20s, really bruised and battered, still with a faith, but really hurt by Christian community. And so I needed to find somewhere where I could worship, where I could go, where I could go, no one would talk to me, where I could go, worship God, walk out, be ignored. And we thank God for the Church of England, because I ended up worshipping at Birmingham Cathedral, which was near where I worked in Birmingham city centre at that point. And they pretty much just let me come and go. And I remember when I was ready to engage again with Christian community, I said to one of the vicars there as I was leaving, well, hi, I'm Aaron, and I've been coming here for a few months. He said, yes, we've noticed. And I said, I didn't really want to talk to anyone. He says, yes, we noticed that too. And I said, but now I'm ready. And therein began really a journey that really emphasized different aspects of the faith. I think having been started off in what was quite a low church Baptist setting, and moving to a Church of England one, I rediscovered it countered some of my prejudices. I used to think, I think when I was a Baptist, Church of England, just set prayers, just reading out the same thing, no room for the Spirit, how boring must that be? And then I got there and discovered the beauty of liturgy. I discovered the importance for me of a Eucharistically shaped faith, of hearing God speak, not only in the Bible and in prayers, which I discovered as a Baptist, but also in Holy Communion, in bread and wine, in the Psalms, in the joy of liturgy. And so much of the CV liturgy, you hear the Psalms come back time and again, be that in daily prayer or in the set Sunday readings. The beauty and the depth of the Psalms, not only just in terms of joy, but also in times of challenge and anguish. And really my faith deepened in a way that I wasn't expecting in any way. And it was a joy to discover more of the Lord in that way and through that worship. And it was a few years later when I actually had left my job as a lawyer and started working for the Church of England doing communications for the Diocese of Birmingham, that that a few people who I respected and trusted said, have you ever thought about being a vicar? And I hadn't. And on their prompting, I put myself forward for the process, the ordination process, and had a kind of one-time deal with God, because I was really enjoying the work that I did, doing communications in Birmingham. And I was like, Lord, I'll be obedient. I'll do it. But if it's a no, I've got a really good plan B all worked out here. But it was a yes. And yeah, I was surprised by it, I think, as many others. And I didn't naturally see myself as a priest in the Church of England. I'd never seen another Asian man as a priest. Never been to a service. I think I'd been in the Church of England, I think it was 30 years before I saw another Asian man either preside at communion or preach who was a Church of England vicar. And I'd served in Birmingham, in London. All right, more acceptable when you think, I did my curacy in Harrogate. I did 5 years in Durham. Perhaps not such a surprise given the demographics there. But, I served in Birmingham, in Wolverhampton. I worked in London for 5 years, and I'd never experienced that. So being a vicar in the CV wasn't a natural progression. I think, when we hear that phrase quite naturally, that you've got to see it to be it, if you don't see it, it's all that more difficult, I think, to imagine yourself in it.
Yeah. And your wife is ordained as well, isn't she?
Yeah. I met my wife, Jo, at Vicar School at Cranmer Hall in Durham. She's a couple of years ahead of me. So she was just starting her third year. I was just starting my first. And it was a real surprise and joy to meet Jo. And now we have a wonderful, beautiful daughter too. And so Jo did her curacy ahead of me in the then diocese of Ripon and Leeds, where we find ourselves again. And she's a theological educator. She teaches. She now trains others to be licensed lay ministers and vicars, and teaches biblical studies amongst other things. So, I followed her, as it were, to North Yorkshire, then where she had her curacy, and where I then followed as we were married.
What a team. What a team. Well, as I say, you've written the Archbishop of York's Advent book, Stick with Love. Why do you think Stephen Cotterill wanted you to write this year's book?
I think one of the things about Stephen is that he has a strong commitment to racial justice. And this book is really rooted in two particular biblical images. One from Revelation 7, that standing before the throne of God, people of tribes of every tongue and nation, and the subtitle of the book, as it were, rejoicing in every tongue, every tribe, every nation, is a nod to that image of people from all nations and all tongues standing before the throne of God, because that's who we are as a church. We are universal, both global and through time. That we join together with all the saints before the throne of God. And that wonderful vision is really a reinforcement of what we know, that the church is universal, global, Catholic in the small c sense. And there are times when we restrict that through our own behaviours, through our own views. And in some ways, the subtext of the book is to say that when you consider all the saints in the church, and by that, I mean in the biblical Pauline sense of saints, not just those holy women and men who we commemorate, we recognise that the church is a body that has many tongues, that is joyously universal. That image of the church, which we might restrict, particularly say in C of E terms, to some kind of rural, a Saxon building on a rural common, that whole John Major, I think, line of an old woman cycling to evensong in her village, that the church is so much more than that. And I think that Stephen's vision and view of the church, particularly around racial justice, both in nations and of nations, so within our nation as well as across others, and that's something that he's been committed to throughout his ministry. And so that picture from Revelation, and also from Isaiah, when God speaking of all nations coming to the holy hill, to his holy hill, where all nations would be found. Those two biblical images reinforce that sense, I think, of who we are as Christian women and men and as a body. So those are the biblical visions that the book is rooted in. And then the book itself, daily devotions, considering individual women and men, Christian women and men, whose stories are stories of hope, even in times of suffering, providing stories of hope in the midst of challenge. And I think, Ruth, as we look around the world now, stories of hope are things that we could really do with.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be looking at some of those stories of hope in a later episode. But would you just say, what is Advent? If someone has no idea what Advent is, and crucially, why is it significant, do you think, Aaron?
I think Advent's a time of preparation on two different ways. Firstly, it's a preparation for the coming of the light into the world, for Christmas, for the birth of Jesus, for God taking on human flesh and entering human history. And so it's a spiritual preparation for that. It's also, in some ways, a time to think of the last things, a time for a spiritual MOT. There are kind of echoes, really, between Lent and Advent. Just as in Lent, we prepare for Easter, so in Advent, we prepare for Christmas. And so there are traditions of considering Advent as a time of judgment, of hell, of heaven, and almost doing a spiritual MOT to say, where am I with God in my journey? To remember that line, ironically, from Lent, that we are but dust, and to dust we shall return. But we prepare for that in the light of Christ during Advent, in the knowledge of the coming of the light into the world, just as at Lent we do it in the knowledge of the resurrection to come. So there is that sense of preparation. Of course, in the wider world, Ruth, Advent is calendars. Simply, it's a build up to Christmas, which
specifically
the secular
chocolate
world,
ones.
And it's amazing. I mentioned in the book the number of different types of Advent calendars you can get now. I think we've had in this house, we've had chocolate ones before. We've had, for my daughter, lip balms, a different lip balm every day through Advent. And someone wants...
Who doesn't need 24 lip balms?
Exactly, particularly during December. And I think someone once bought me one that was pork scratchings, which I know is not everyone's taste and flavour. But part of that in the secular world, I mean, Christmas, here we are, in November, and Marks and Spencer's have just released their Christmas campaign. I'm sure John Lewis is, and all those of it. Christmas for commerce begins in November and is about the build-up to spending. For Christians, Advent begins in that first week of December and is a turning in our hearts, in our rhythms, in our focus towards the coming of Christ into the world.
And you quote Walter Brueggemann, who says that Christians are in-betweeners. What do you think he meant by that? And what significance does that have to Advent and, I suppose, looking forward to Christmas?
I think Walter Brueggemann used that phrase, I think, specifically in relation to Easter and Lent. And I think his sense was that for those first disciples, what did it feel like on that day after Good Friday, on the Saturday, where they were living between the reality of the crucifixion and the promise of the resurrection? And there is a sense for us that we do the same now. I think Tom Wright does a similar thing when he talks about Christian life lived out as a 5-act play, where we are now living between the fourth and the fifth act, between Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, and that time when he will come again. And we live in that time now. And so that in-between sense of living in between events, because we know where the story ends. We know that we live as part of God's story and his relationship with his creation, of which we are part. And that salvation history, we know that it ends with the return of Christ, with the coming of the King into the world, with that time of judgment, when that picture from Revelation, when all will be gathered before the throne of God. And really that's what we yearn for the fulfilling of God's promise. And we live with the sure and certain hope of that promise to come.
And finally, what does Christmas mean to you personally? And do you have any sort of special Christmas traditions in the Aurora family? Do you know yet how you're going to be celebrating Christmas together?
Not yet. I mean, it was funny growing up, because I didn't grow up in a Christian family. Christmas was still marked, not religiously, it had to be said, but we derived our own kind of rituals. So back then, back in the 70s, when there were 3 channels on telly, the Queen at 3 p.m. always used to be a big thing, followed by the James Bond film that would come on ITV after the Queen, and that would be the centerpiece of Christmas. My mom and dad, we ran a family business, so Christmas was one of the few times when you get 2 days off in a row. Otherwise, every day was a work day, even Sundays, replenishing stock. And Sunday, was quieter in the house and meant a lie-in for my mum and dad. But actually getting 2 days off in a row was unheard of. So in Christmas, really, Christmas perhaps in Easter Sunday, Bank Holiday Monday, but that was special in that way. For me now, of course, church, especially I think midnight communion, midnight mass, there is something wonderfully, beautifully special about that service and about ushering in Christmas with communion and then getting home. And of course, for those who are ministers and who take such services, straight after that comes the 8 a.m. Service on Christmas Day. So that can be a kind of tough night, leading to a bit of a snooze after Christmas lunch. This year, I'll be marking Christmas by doing a service in prison in Leeds, which will be a real privilege to do that, to do a communion service with the men in Leeds prison and to be doing that with them. And that will be the main service of the day for me. And then afterwards, probably travelling down to Birmingham to spend it with my mom, my brother, and that's where we're going this year.
Oh, brilliant. Well, when it gets there, I hope you have a wonderful time and a happy Christmas.
And also with you, Ruth, also with you.
Unapologetic from Premier Unbelievable. For more shows, resources and our newsletter, visit premierunbelievable.com.